All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Blue and Gold Gridiron podcast, where we're going to try to talk about everything high school football related, coaching related, all sorts of little different topics. I'm Cody Collette, head football coach at Prescott High School in Northern Arizona. And joining me, as will always be the case, is Tyler Brusso, our defensive coordinator and defensive extraordinaire there. I know part of the reason we decided to try to do this is I know I personally have gained so much from listening to various high school football coaching podcasts and enjoyed listening to Kenny Simpson and Joe Daniel, Mitch Johnson, Coach Chip, love Coach Chip. Started listening to 614 Headsets, Coach Tatum, a lot of different guys out there putting content out there that's been super, super valuable. And while I definitely am far from an expert or anything close to it, I thought, why not get on here and be able to talk ball with some people, and we'll have different subjects. We're going to kind of attack this a little bit differently than maybe some of those podcasts that all do a fantastic job of kind of mixing up their content and mixing up their subjects. We're going to really, our hope is to dive deep into a category. Like, for instance, we're going to do 4 or 5 episodes here on program building. This will be the only episode that's just us. Super excited. Next week, we're going to have a national championship winning junior college Hall of Fame coach Joe Kirsting on, the guy who literally wrote the book on, sorry about that, building a championship football team. Hall of Famer there in junior college football. We're going to have him on next week, which we're super excited about. And we'll have various guests on. We're going to really examine a topic each week, and we'll stay on the same topic for probably 4 or 5, maybe even 6 weeks, and then we'll move on. Try to get stuff out there that people can hopefully use to help them. As I said, I've had the pleasure, I just finished my 25th year coaching high school football, all in the great state of Arizona. 12 of those have been as a head coach, 11 of them have been at Prescott High School. We've won a few, we've lost a few, just concluded a good solid 10-2 season. 76-40 over that time period. Been able to go to the playoffs many times, win some region championships. Certainly haven't got over the hump, so to speak, to get to that state championship level. But certainly one of the goals of this would be in talking to various people, continuing to grow. Because I think the great part about these podcasts and the great part about getting content out there is the ability to share and grow with each other. And I know some of the guys I mentioned, and of course Glacier Clinics and so many great things. I've been able to learn so much, and I'm so grateful to all those people. And turn it over to Tyler here. Talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get going on program building.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm excited just to be here to talk ball. We do this almost every day, so I figure why not just pop a mic in front of us and record it, because we're doing it every day anyway. Might as well just document it or put it on the record. I just finished, I think it's my 5th year coaching. It feels like a lot more, but I still feel like I'm new to it, and I learn stuff every year. And I've been fortunate to be around a lot of really awesome people, smart people, talented people with a wide range of experiences. And I just try to be a sponge and soak up as much as possible. And you go through highs, you go through lows, but if you let it, all that teaches you so much. And like you said, each year is just about growing and learning and improving as a coach, and hopefully that just pays off dividends for kids and players. And at the end of the day, it's our job just to maximize their potential and what they've got, and put the best product on the field, and also the best person in the classroom, on campus, in life. And it's such a joy to get to do that every day, day in and day out, and work with people like you and all the other guys on our staff. So I'm excited to dive into this and have our guests on and unpack what they have to share and their knowledge and their experience. And I've met Joe briefly, but it'll be nice to just hear him unwrap everything he's done and been through, because you name it, he's about done it all. So it'll be exciting. I'm ready to get going.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all that. And I would be remiss before we get going. I'm going to be a little bit of a homer, and I got to talk about how proud I know all of us are in the great state of Arizona of our Arizona State Sun Devils. I'm a longtime Sun Devil. My dad actually played in the 73 Fiesta Bowl, which we've talked about in the coach's office a few times. Pittsburgh, they defeated in that Fiesta Bowl, who had a running back by the name of Tony Dorsett. The Sun Devils came out on top of that. My grandfather actually played, and everybody, and you can look it up, get on Google right now, and my grandfather actually played in the 50 and 51 Salad Bowl, which was the name of the bowl game for the conference champion. This is pre-WAC days, obviously pre-Pac-10 days, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention how awesome it was, an incredible season for Arizona State. Super exciting to watch them. Hopefully, I really, really am hopeful, and I believe with all my heart that we're going to be on the cusp of another great era of Sun Devil football. Nobody probably listening to this, or not many people around, remember that kind of golden era of Sun Devil football from 58 there to 79 with Frank Cush. I don't either. I wasn't alive for it, but Arizona State, 6 in the 70s, I believe 6 top 10 finishes, 6 or 7 conference titles, multiple Fiesta Bowl wins. The Sporting News 1975 national champions, even if the AP and UPI at the time awarded Oklahoma, mistakenly in my opinion, not that I was alive for it. But anyhow, certainly so proud of the Sun Devils and had a great time watching them in that Peach Bowl Classic against Texas. It was just an incredible football game, Kenny Dillingham, and so cool to watch so many Arizona high school football coaches on that staff. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham started for Coach Regal at Chaparral. You got Jason Mons, Sean Aguano, just a fantastic guy. Brian Ward, who actually worked at Glendale Community College with our guests next week, Joe Kirsting. So happy to see them do so well. And obviously, I thought it was just the epitome of grit and passion that the Sun Devils played with and fighting back into that game against an unbelievable Texas squad. So really, really proud of them. Looking forward to watching the semifinal games this week. But like I said, this week we're going to dive into program building. And I've, like I said, been fortunate to be at Prescott High School 11 years. In that time, I think I've garnered a few things, always talking to various people about what it takes to kind of build a program and shape a program, and most importantly, shape young men's lives. And the number one focus being to make them better people, better students, and better athletes. And we try to focus on that in that order, I think. But we're going to kind of attack this from the lens, I guess, of talking about you just got the job and you're starting to build your program and starting to put things in place for your program and what's important and what do you do. And obviously, I made 10 million mistakes through this process. I've done this a couple times. One year outside of Prescott and decided I want to come back. And that's one of the things I think is critical in examining when you take over a program and you want to be a head coach, is looking at the fit, whether it's the right fit for you and your family. And Prescott High School has certainly been the right fit for me, and I love it here. And I will never be a head coach anywhere else but here. But we're basically going to look at this from the lens of you have the job, now what? You could do, and I think eventually we will do an episode or few on getting the job. And I know Chris Four and some people have some great content out there on guys that are pursuing those jobs and what you can try to do to market yourself and give yourself the best opportunity to land a high school head football coaching job. But we're going to attack it from you got the job and now what? So I wrote down a couple of notes, and obviously there's, if I'm sure if hopefully we get some people listening that are enjoying it, some successful coaches, and we're going to pick their brain more importantly in the coming weeks, because they'll certainly have more to offer than I will on this. And if you have more to offer in the comments, please get on there and tell us your thoughts on building a program. But I put down number one, you got to meet the stakeholders. And by that, you got to meet your team, you got to meet your players, you got to meet the parents. Obviously, if you've gotten the job, you've talked to the admin and determined that was a good fit for you and everything you need to get in place that way. But I recall my own first meeting when I got the job at Prescott High School in February of 2012, so almost 13 years ago now. Driving, I lived in the Valley at the time. Those of you, if you're not familiar with Arizona, 7.5 million people in Arizona, but really 5 to 5.5 million of them are all in the Valley, and Prescott's in northern Arizona, which is in the northern part of the state. And there was a big traffic jam, and I was late to the introduction as the head coach. So don't do that. And I left, incidentally, 4 hours early. But if you've, there's one way in, one way out type of deal. So it makes it a little bit tougher. But you got to meet your stakeholders. You got to meet your parents. You got to meet the kids. You got to talk to the kids. Kind of get their feelings on the program, what can be done. I think now, and Coach Brusso did an amazing job for us this year, putting together a leadership council that I think was really beneficial for our program. But I think meeting those people and getting their thoughts and getting everybody's input on what it is, the program you're taking over and what needs to be done. And obviously you're going to do it your way and what you determine is the best going forward. But I think you always want to have people invested. If you can't get them invested in what you're doing, then it's probably going to be difficult to get them to put forth the effort needed to turn around a program. Because let's be honest here, if you're taking over a program, most people don't get to take over a state championship winning program. You take over a program where, for whatever reason, and that's something I'm going to get into later a little bit, for whatever reason that may be, and there's a lot of good coaches that haven't had success at various programs, but you got to kind of examine what needs to be done. So what are your thoughts there right after you get the position there, Coach?
Well, I agree with you about meeting parents and families, but I like your thoughts because one of the hardest things I imagine, especially you coming to Prescott and totally foreign area for you, it's kind of funny because now working with you, I was there as a freshman in the spring when you got hired, but your first season was my sophomore season. But I kind of have that lens of now as a coach working alongside you, but also a player coming in and seeing like you reshape and redirect things. So it's kind of a funny, I guess, just angle or way to analyze it. But I'd be curious how you figure out and and how you sort through knowing who to listen to and knowing what input to take and what feedback to be receptive to versus to maybe not jump on or maybe just toss aside entirely, just because. I just imagine it's hard to figure out who to trust, who to listen to, and whose voices, have the words that need to be heard. And I just imagine coming in 2012, that was really challenging.
I think that's such a great point because there's so many people you don't know if you're moving to a different area, and obviously you're getting all the other things done. At the time, I had just gotten married, and we were moving up here trying to get our house situation and everything done. I think the number one thing, obviously, and that kind of relates to what you're talking about in those voices to listen to be honest, and you got to do your background check and find out about these guys from as many people as possible, but a little bit of that, and obviously they got to pass a background check and do different things before they're able to coach with you. But I think you got a little bit listen to your gut, and sometimes we all make mistakes on that. I know a lot of times we'll talk to my wife and when she meets one of our coaches, and she has a really, really good sense, and she's been almost 100% on that. But,
there you go.
I think the next thing that obviously you have to do is you have to start to build a staff. And I would say that when you're building a staff, loyalty's got to be the number one thing you're looking for. You can teach guys what you want in your system, and that's important to have a system, obviously, which we'll get into next. But I think when you're building a staff, you got to be really, really thorough in your questions. And I think some of the things you want to first and foremost ask them is why do they want to coach? If it's just because little Johnny's going to be a freshman, then that's probably not going to be a great fit. But obviously, unless you're in Texas or Florida or some of these other parts of the country, you're not going to be able to, in a lot of cases, add teachers. So hopefully there's guys that were members of the previous staff that are teachers. I think it's always good to try to get as many teachers on the staff as possible. I know this is a conversation I've had with my AD. It seems like when I was in school in the 90s, our whole staff taught on campus, and now it just doesn't happen. I know that between you and Coach Tolley on our staff and Coach Harrelson, I believe we have 4 on staff, which I feel very fortunate to have those 4. But I think first and foremost, you want to find out anybody that was a member of the previous staff. You want to get their feelings on anything, and you want to talk to them, and you want to talk to any teachers in the building that have had experience coaching. I think anytime you can get educators on your staff, they have a really good feel. And that's not to say that there aren't outstanding coaches that come from not the educational field, because there are. But I think you always want to look there and look in the community, and you want to find out why they want to be there. I think you need to find out about them as a person, kind of get their story, and do a lot of listening, because I think that's how you learn stuff about people, is listening. And I think you want to listen to their story a little bit, find out their story in the game, why they want to be a part of the game, because I think all of us have so many great things about football that we want to be involved with, because it had such a great impact on our life. But, and my daughter's going to walk in here right now as we're taping this. Maddie, did you go another door, sweetie? But we will get into that. But I think you want to find out a little bit about their story, and then you can dive into the details of football and those type of things. But first and foremost, I think you got to start putting together a staff and figure out who's a good person first and foremost, and who's loyal and going to do a good job for you and your program.
I like that. That makes sense. If you listen long enough, people usually tell you who they are and what they're about. So that all tracks, makes sense. And I agree. Meet the players, meet the families, get your team together, and then, obviously as the head coach in the interview, you have the direction. You know where you want things to go, and just most importantly, making sure everyone's pulling the rope in the way that you set and you want. You don't always have to micromanage and decide how you get there, but you want to make sure that the end goal is set and clear for everybody, and then we all work towards that in the best way possible. And honestly, year to year, I imagine that changes and looks differently, but
every team looks different, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I don't remember if it was you this year or somebody else, but somebody had the line where, do you want to coach 1 year 20 times, or do you want to coach 20 years differently, and each year's its own, different beast? And that really resonated with me, and I really liked that, because it should be different. And like we talked about earlier, learning, growing, changing, adapting. Kids, I'm not even, I guess, that old, but I feel like kids nowadays are so different than they were even when I was in school. And not that that's a bad thing, but the approach just is different, and the way you reach and get them to buy into your message is just different. So
I think, that's a great point. And I hope that I have 25 years of experience, not 1 year repeated 25 times. But I think the number one thing you got to do is try to set your standard and this is something after you start building your staff, is you obviously got to set your standard, but you got to do that while not bad-mouthing the previous staff. And in my opinion, and obviously there's a lot of different views on this, you have to set your vision and set your standard, but there's absolutely no reason to badmouth or belittle the previous staff. And I think that's maybe an ego thing, and we've talked about this in the coach's office repeatedly. I know the C word, I call it culture, is extremely important, but I think in the effort to establish your environment, I prefer to call it what you do on a day-to-day basis, I think it's important not to badmouth those guys that came before you, particularly and when we took over at Prescott. Prescott has played football since 1910, since before Arizona was a state. So I think it would have been unbelievably arrogant of myself for anybody to come in and badmouth the accomplishments of Prescott football, and that would just be foolish. There have been some unbelievable football coaches and unbelievable football players, and we were going to try to set what our standard was. At the time, we're playing with a lot of tempo, which we still believe in, playing really hard, playing with a physical downhill run game, try to be aggressive defensively, all those type of things. But I think setting that standard is important, but I don't think you need to belittle anybody in that process. And to me, I do see that a lot when you talk about guys are taking over a program. They seem to always want to backtrack and almost, if things don't go well initially, they want to kind of make excuses to some degree of why that is and what they took over. And I just don't think that's in any way beneficial.
Well, I think that's just true for life. There's no value in looking back. You just got to look forward. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what was or what happened. It's on you now to push it the way it needs to go, or the way you feel is best.
100%. Obviously, as Coach Brusso knows, I'm a big plan guy. I try to plan everything, probably to a fault. But obviously, I think, and that's something, if you're making the plan when you get the job, I think you're probably already behind. So you got to plan for success. You got to have that plan in place. And I'm not even necessarily, I'm far talking about from X's and O's, because to me, in being able to have success in any program, I think the X's and O's, to be honest, for the most part, are low on the priority list in terms of getting the program set. But you got to have a plan. You got to have your strength, speed, and conditioning plan. And I also want to throw a shout out. One of the highlights for me last year at the Glacier Clinic was getting to meet the great Tony Holler. I am fully on board with Feed the Cats. If you're not familiar with it, I would encourage you to look into that. But our speed and strength program has been obviously influenced tremendously by them. We're going to prioritize speed. Part of that being that we're not typically the biggest team, but we have good team speed always. We have some athletic kids that can run around. And I think you got to decide what you want in your strength program, what you think is best for your strength program moving forward, what type of team you want to be. I mean, the game is definitely played different than it was. It's very rarely played in a phone booth. And I think that's why some of those schools that play those smash mouth styles have a lot of success, because people aren't used to playing that style. So if that's what you want to do and you want to pound out the weight room, I think that's great. But I think you really got to make speed a priority. I am not the techiest guy, so big thanks to Coach Brusso. We started timing flying tens with our chip system that I got turned on to by Tony Holler and looking at all that stuff. So that's certainly been really exciting, and been able to do that really well. And I think your guys get excited when they start seeing better times and those type of things that way. So I think that's really, really important to set your speed and strength program. Sorry about that. My daughter's running through here. But you got, and Tony Holler, if you're not familiar with it, prioritize speed. And prioritize doesn't mean you have to spend the most time on it. Speed needs to be trained in small doses, and he always gives that analogy of it's like a poison. If you have one drink, maybe you feel okay. You have 10, you're keeled over. You have, like aspirin. That's a better, more education appropriate analogy. You have 2, you clear a headache. You have 10, you're dead. So I think speed needs to be trained in the same fashion. So our strength program has got to be kind of built around how you want to do things practice-wise. I'm a big 90-minute to 100-minute practice guy, but Feed the Cats has been really, really important to us. And I think it's the last 4 years since we've implemented it. We've been in the quarterfinals 3 out of the last 4 years, and I think won 2 or 3, or shared 2 or 3, and one outright won region championship. And not to mention, most importantly, I think our kids have had more fun. They've had more energy. We've gotten to the end of the season, and everybody has been bummed that the season was over. I know I am definitely at fault for, at times, pushing that grind so much that we got to the end of the season, and there was probably coaches and players that were like, well, it's a bummer we didn't win, but some of the work is over now. And I think that's important to examine as you're setting your program and those type of things. The other thing is you got to get a calendar of events out to your people, and our school uses Sports U, which has certainly been a great thing. You got to get a calendar out to everybody immediately. Obviously, in those meetings with your stakeholders, you want to stress how important it is for them to be there and be committed and those type of things. And that's not going to happen overnight. To be honest, it's not going to happen in a couple of years. But I think the sooner you get those dates out there and people can start planning things, the better you're going to be off in that regard.
Yeah, I love what you said about you're talking about conditioning, the kids enjoying it and loving it, because obviously the way we run practice is different than when I played, but to me, whether it's in the it's funny because the older gentlemen feel like it's a lot easier, but you get more out of it, I think. But anyway, I found that whether it's in the classroom, on the football field, the restroom room, baseball field, basketball court, whatever you're doing, if people enjoy being there and want to be a part of that, it's so much easier to get them to buy into whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the specific lesson or the plan for the practice of the day. And so much of it, like, things are hard and things are difficult and there's a grind to it, but it doesn't have to be a miserable, terrible experience. It can still be enjoyable. It can still be fun while you're working hard and while you're getting out everything that you need to. And so I just love the fact that we do get to the end of the year and people are still jazzed up, excited, and energized and want to keep going, versus are just kind of burnt out and grinded into a little pile of dust. It's just so important to me that people enjoy what they're doing. Because if you enjoy it and you want to be there, you're gonna go all out for it and leave everything out there. That's been a huge thing that I've really enjoyed being a part of. And it's not what we've done everywhere we've been, and that's something that I think is pretty cool.
I know. I think when you hear Coach Holler talk about it, he talks about it rejuvenates coaches. And I feel as excited about coaching as I ever have entering year 26 here. And that gets into our next one on here. And this is kind of before you even start coaching. I think you got to know your why. We could do multiple episodes on that. But number one, first and foremost, obviously you want to help kids be the best person they can possibly be. We talk about our mission statement in our program, and we'll talk about that when we're getting into teaching character and leadership. But we try to talk to our guys about reaching their full potential as people, students, and athletes while stressing the importance of the team coming first. I was looking at ASU's stuff, and it's so fantastic. They have be a good person, make good decisions, work harder, having more fun than any team in the country, and I think that's outstanding. Ours has always been, I think, number one, we buy into that John Wooden philosophy. You won't hear our program talk about it, and this happens a lot in the big programs, and God bless them, they're doing a great job, and we don't like to talk about necessarily goals of winning a state championship or winning a region championship. I am firmly in the John Wooden camp of be the best team you're capable of becoming. And how do you become the best team you're capable of becoming is everybody in the program is working on being the best version of themselves. And to me, the ability to be the best version of yourself is very simply, you want to be better today than you were yesterday, and better tomorrow than you are today. And if you can stack those 1% increases and improvements, I think you can really, really go a very far way in that realm. But knowing your why and knowing what you're after in your program is of critical importance.
Well, I think it's so important to make sure that everyone is in agreement with that, and whether they look at it from a different angle or there's a different approach to it, but everyone has to be aimed and pointed towards that direction and that goal. Excuse me, whatever that may be. I know for myself, I get so much satisfaction and so much joy out of seeing a kid develop or level up or just take things to higher than they were before, versus any kind of like success or victory on the field. My favorite moment still from coaching out of all my years is last year we had a freshman starting on varsity for us, his very first high school football game ever at the 6A level at Corona del Sol. And he got a game-sealing interception with under a minute to go in the fourth quarter. And just to see that kid who's 14 years old starting, with a bunch of 6A seniors and whatnot, to have that moment of validation, to feel that confidence of I do belong, and just see that doubt just leave him, and just his teammates pour into him and love on him. Like, to me, there's not a cooler moment than that, because all that hard work and all that shared struggle and effort and energy and that grind you put in together, all that pays off in those moments. And then just to see the players just celebrate and love one another, to me, it doesn't get better than that. And that all goes back to the kids like we talked about, and just helping them maximize and reach their potential and just be your best. Because at the end of the day, all any of us can do is be our best. None of us are perfect, but if everyone's their best and puts that together, then you fill in a lot more gaps than you have holes, I think.
And what you said so important and so difficult to get everybody on the same page. And a lot of times, as we've kind of talked about, sometimes it's more not sometimes, most of the time I would say it's more difficult getting all the adults on the same page than it is necessarily the kids. But that's certainly something that you need to examine when you're building your staff and doing those type of things. The other thing I put on here is when you take over a program, depending upon where you're at, you need to set realistic expectations. And in that process of getting the job, I think it's really important to know what your AD determines is successful. If you're in a place in Texas or Georgia or one of these places, you need to know, hey, you're moving. If you go 3-7 this first year or second year or what have you. And God bless those guys. And I know that a lot of them are paid very handsomely. I would have difficulty managing an environment like that. But I think you have to understand what your AD considers successful. If you got guys doing the right things on campus and you're making strides, it takes a long time to see those results depending upon where you're at as a program. And sometimes those victories aren't necessarily on the field. Now, if you're blessed enough to take over a great program that's already you're kind of driving the bus downhill, then God bless you. But in my experience, that doesn't happen very often. So I think you need to set realistic expectations. In so many years, I've watched guys get up there and they're talking about taking over a program, and they say our goal is to be in the state championship and go 14-0, and that's all well and good. But I think if that's the only thing you're after, I don't know. I've coached 25 years, and I would garner to say we've been pretty successful and had a lot of people become better people, and been fortunate to attend a lot of weddings and Eagle Scout stuff and all those type of things. And we've never won a state championship. I've never won one. Coach Brousseau has been a part of one a couple years ago at the 4A level. But I don't look back at my career as a failure, because I've never been a part of a state championship team or staff. And there's so many great coaches that never will. And I think you have to set realistic expectations for yourself and for your program.
To me, that goes back to the fit that you mentioned earlier, where making sure that wherever you're going, wherever you're applying for or planning to aim for, you're in alignment with that administration, and you guys are all, again, just working together in that same direction. My brief time in the Valley in Phoenix, Arizona, I just was familiar with and heard so many stories about coaches and admin that just weren't on the same page and weren't working together, and the conflict that created and just the difficulty. And I just feel like you're never going to succeed if you guys are on different pages and aren't fully in lockstep. It's very similar, I guess, at the NFL level to a GM and head coach. If they're on different pages, it's going to fall apart pretty quick, and finger pointing happens and whatnot. So, I just found that to be such a great point, and so true, because I think success at Prescott High School looks very different than Chandler High School, and I don't think anything's wrong with that. And I don't think that's trying to compromise, but it just goes back to being the very best you could be year in and year out. And to me, that's part of what I love about coaching at a smaller school in a smaller town, is that you don't have control over so many of the variables of who's on the team, kids coming in, what each class looks like. To me, that's the beauty of high school football, is you get what you get, and you gotta put it together and make it the best it can be. So much of it's out of your control, but you're responsible for shaping it into something that is successful for whatever you define that as. And I enjoy that process. And yeah,
as do I love it. And shout out to our whole region, which I love coaching in the region that we're in, this part of the state. I think kids kind of grow up wanting to be Badgers, or they grow up wanting to be Bears, which is our rival, Bradshaw Mountain. And I still think that's important. There's a lot of people that would maybe consider that a dinosaur now in this day and age of high school athletics. But I think it's important, and I think it's something that is undervalued. This next one I put on here is you have to, and this gets into having your plan, is when you're talking about how you teach character and leadership. And I'm going to defer to Coach Brousseau. He set up a leadership council for us this year, and I think it paid huge dividends for us. But my 2 cents on this is I think it's important for you to find out who your alphas are. Who's the dudes in your, and to be honest with you, in my experience, kids, and for good or bad, a lot of times follow who's a good football player. There's some guys that might be, you want them walking in the door to take your daughter out to the prom, but they're not going to follow them necessarily because they're not great on the football field. And we can have a separate conversation about that, but I think you got to find out who your alphas are, and you got to steer them in the right direction. You got to get them pulling the rope the same way you are. You have to get their buy-in. I think if you don't, you're going to be treading water, so to speak. That's going to be something that's difficult. And obviously, Coach Saban talks about it, but the best teams are the best teams, and that isn't always necessarily the best record, but the best teams have the best players working the hardest. And that doesn't mean you went 14-0 and win the state championship. We've had teams. The 2020 COVID season is a season that I remember super, super fondly, because we started 0-3 and got absolutely blown out, and then we were able to win every regular season game there and got in the state playoffs with a super young team and a couple of seniors that really, really believed and battled every day. And you wouldn't have been able to see through how they practiced when we were 0-3 to when we went to that winning streak and got in the state playoffs. And it was one of my favorite, most memorable seasons. And we got the doors blown off us by Cactus in the first round. But it's one of my favorite memories of a football team. And it was because some of our best players on those teams worked so hard, and they were the guys that were leading the charge. And I think when you're talking about establishing your character and leadership and those things, before you even worry about teaching it, you got to figure out who are your dudes that your team is going to follow.
100%. That was huge for us this year in identifying those guys. And obviously we had a lot of exceptional players who really stood out, and they were super important and beneficial for us. To me, it all goes back to that shared belief, that buy-in, and just committing as a whole to something bigger than any one individual person or one individual player. And that's where you start. And then using your alphas or your top dudes to help get the rest of the guys there. But there has to be a message, there has to be a value or a story that they want to be a part of that just supersedes any individual human experience. For us this year, we had a pretty great senior class with a lot of really talented athletes. And so for us, we wanted to make a deep playoff run and maximize that and go far. And so how do we get those kids to buy into that? And then how do you show them that what you do day in and day out pays dividends on Friday nights? Little things between interactions between upperclassmen and lowerclassmen, or how hard did you go on this specific rep? I think all that intermixes and plays together in terms of aiming towards that shared goal, and that goal is different each year, and that's not a bad thing, but I think that just helps provide the direction for the specific group that you have, and then just getting them to pour in and just be willing to be totally selfless and sacrifice and lay all their personal wants and desires on the line for that shared team goal. The state championship team you mentioned, I loved being a part of that team. Obviously we were successful, but more so because of that shared love and brotherhood that those kids had. Where I walked into a very, very good situation, but those kids had been playing football together since they were 8 years old, all the way through youth, up through middle school, into high school. Their sophomore years, they made it to the quarters. Junior year, they made it to the semis. And then senior year, they were able to finish it all the way through. But, I mean, man, as coaches, we were just grateful to be there and be a part of that, because that ship was running on its own, and that team was player-driven and player-led. And those kids would show up in the weight room, push themselves, push each other. And we're just there to obviously help make sure everyone's on track and being accountable and responsible and safe. But to be the biggest thing is just getting those players to buy in and take ownership and push each other, because I found for especially high school kids, it has so much more weight, and the message carries so much farther coming from a peer or that top player versus a coach. Because I'm just some adult that they've run into, and they've heard the same thing a million times. But if your best friend who you love tells you something, you're going to listen, even if it's the same message. So it's just getting those players to buy in and take ownership, and just push the rest of the group to really, carry through and follow through. This year for our leadership council, our seniors were kind of split really evenly, and I stumbled on this observation later down the road, but a lot of our guys were really serious and really focused and really just kind of stoic, kind of more reserved people, but they were really good they were rule followers, they were respectful, and those were our focus guys. Those are the guys that we tried to empower to make sure that everyone's locked in, everyone's focused, everyone's, understanding and making sure they're taking care of their assignment responsibilities. And then the other half were our fun guys who a little more eccentric, a little more loud, a little more goofy. We had a handful of personalities. And I never wanted to squash. It's true. It was quite a collection of kids. But I never wanted to squash those personalities, and I never want to stop them from being themselves. So that fun and focus split was really helpful for us, because if you're not enjoying what you're doing and you don't want to be there, you're not going to get much out of it. So trying to combine that enthusiasm and that energy with that attention to detail and just that focus was big for us, and thankfully it seems to have been fairly positive.
I know when we were fortunate to take over there at Prescott High School, I wanted to kind of establish core values for our program, and I probably have too many. I've seen guys that do this much better, and they make this a little bit more streamlined, because I'm not sure right now if all our kids would know our core values, and I need to do a better job at teaching that, communicating to them. But we always like to try to talk about respect, honesty, toughness, effort, discipline, and selfless. And I bookend respect and selfless, because if I can get on a soapbox for a little bit, I think those are maybe things that are lacking now everywhere is respect. We want to respect each other. We want to respect our classmates. We want to respect people, our parents, teachers, obviously, people in the community, everybody. And I think that's something that maybe is I don't know if it's underemphasized or just doesn't happen as much as it used to. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but and the idea of being selfless, because we're in such a me first era, and I can understand that to some degree, but I always try to talk to our kids about, if you're a me first guy, you're going to probably struggle as a husband and a father. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons we can teach them is to try to be selfless, try to put others above yourself. And really, really enjoyed talking about those things. And the thing about it is, you get in season, it's so hard. You're so worried about scheme and different things. That's one of the things, and we're very blessed. Our administration is fantastic. We have a football hour. We don't have all our guys in there because we want as many multi-sport guys as possible, so our basketball guys and our baseball guys leave us. But the ability to get to work with those guys in the off season, I think right now is when you really can dial in those things, and then you can draw back from that during the season. There's a lot of great resources out there too that I know people have when they're teaching leadership and talking about their core values. But I think that's something that you have to determine what is most important for your program, what you want your program to look like. And hopefully our program looks like respectful guys that have some degree of selflessness and are disciplined, are tough, they're honest, all those type of things. So like I said, respect, honesty, toughness, effort, discipline, selfless, something we've tried to kind of build our program around. And sometimes we fail and sometimes we've had successes, but I think it's important that you set that vision and to talk to your players quite a bit about what you want your program to be about.
Amen to that. It's super important to just be explicit with what you want and where you're going and how you're going to get there and what everyone needs to do to be a part of that. And then when they're not doing that, accountability and following through. And accountability does not mean necessarily reprimand or punishment or coming down on certain things, but it takes a lot of different shapes or forms, but just making sure everyone's following through and doing their responsibilities and what their job is. And again, those values that you mentioned goes to, having something that's bigger than yourself and aimed higher than any one thing. And to me, that's the beauty of football and team sport, is that it's the ultimate team game. If one person messes up out of 11, then the whole team looks bad. And you got to be willing to put yourself and your ego aside and do what's best for the group. And I just think that individual ego, whether it's player, coach, you name it, that can be the kryptonite of any, not even football program, but just organization or operation as a whole. You got to be willing to put your ego aside and just lay it down for the group.
That's all great stuff. And the next thing I put on here, and this is going to be a little bit dependent on which state you're in and your rules and regulations. In Arizona, really, there's not many in terms of off-season work and what you can do and different stuff like that. We can't put pads on. We don't have padded spring ball. And I know there's a ton of states that don't have spring ball at all. But you got to some degree, assess your players' talents. I think you got to find out what they can do. I know I remember setting up some field days when I was taking over at Prescott High School. And the one year I was at another school as the head coach, trying to get down there because I was still teaching at one place and traveling to another. So that was an interesting process, particularly when it was Prescott and it was 2 hours away. But finding out those, setting up field days if you're allowed to do that. And if you have spring ball, obviously assessing your players' abilities. And even before you worry about installing your system or what have you, but assessing what their strengths are. Because if they can't do what you want to do, it's not going to be real successful for you. And I think you have to adjust to them, not the other way around. While I do think it's good to adjust your system, this kind of is a little bit contradictory, but I think it's something important. While I do think it's good to adjust your scheme to your players' abilities, at the end of the day, you got to coach what you know. If you've been a wing T guy your whole life and you go in and try to put in Mike Leach's air raid, I'm not sure that that's going to be super successful. So I think it's important that you coach what you know. And I think coaching what you know is going to put your players in the best position to be successful. I know our system's built around a lot of things. I like to think it's, and we'll definitely, as we get in here at episodes, talk about offensive and defensive systems from various guys. But I think your system has to be versatile enough to adjust to your players' talents. But I think if you're switching your scheme year to year, I don't think that's going to be real successful. I think you have to keep tenets. And even this year, we had a scheme that probably looked very different than what we'd done in the past. But I think some of those core principles in gap scheme, run game, and some of those things were always still there in every offense and team we've had. But you got to assess your players' abilities and try to figure out how you're going to put them in positions to be successful. Because if you don't put them in these positions to be successful, that's on you. That's not on them. And that's a pet peeve of mine. And we've all been guilty of it when you lose a game or something. And I like to think it's important for our guys to always recognize, and myself, that starts with me, but recognize what can I do to make the group better. And I think that's something that gets back into your selfless, but assess those players' abilities, find out what they can do, and then start piecing things together with your staff on what is going to give you guys the best chance to be successful on Friday nights.
Definitely. And definitely take advantage of those coaches who, some people just have a knack for spotting, great fits. And not so much unconventional, just hasn't been brought up for whatever reason, but we just have a couple guys on staff who are just really good at identifying. And I think this kid would excel here in this position, and they'll explain why and whatnot. But just lean on those people around you to help in that, just because, again, one brain is not as good as multiple or many.
Absolutely.
And an assessment is just, some guys, I just know that some guys just have a little bit of an edge, and it just a little different way of looking at it, and they have a thought, and it's just a perfect fit. And I enjoy getting that perspective, because I don't always see those same things. But I love getting in their head and hearing and seeing why.
I think you guys, there's coach. Everybody has different strengths, and there's some guys that couldn't tell you a 3 technique from a 6 technique, but they're like, I think Tommy could be a real valuable asset for us here, and a lot of times they're right, and it's remarkable, and that's a great point. There's different guys that have different strengths in that regard, and I think you have to really examine that. I coach with a guy, I always tell him this, I joke with him all the time. I say, you are by far and away the best motivational coach I've ever been around in 25 years. Every single kid I've ever seen you could get to want to run through a wall. Schematically, I wouldn't let you game plan a peewee game, but he gets kind of mad about that. But he is, and his teams were always tougher than nails. And he did a great job always, but he just had a knack for reaching kids and motivating. And obviously everybody has to have that to some degree, but he was on the next level in that regard. And there's some guys that are so good schematically, so many brilliant geniuses schematically that are, I listen to sometimes guys at clinics, and I'm like, I thought that when before I took the job at Prescott, I was an assistant at Red Mountain High School for a guy named Ron Wisniewski, and Ron had been a college coach for 20 years, and we used to joke with him because his master's was in astrophysics, and his doctorate was in educational mathematics. So literally, he was a rocket scientist, and he'd coached football at the college level for 20 years, did 6 stops in 20 years, so you do the math, that's about a stop every 3.3 years, I think, somewhere in that area there, but he wanted to get in the high school game because his wife was tired of moving, and I learned, I thought I maybe knew something about football, and then when I sat in the office with him, I quickly learned, no, you don't, because he is, and the great part about him is he literally was the smartest guy in the room, and he never made you feel like he was the smartest guy in the room. I always thought it was funny. His son at the time, he's got to be now in his early 20s or late teens, but he had taken one of those standardized tests, and he got his results back in math. I think he was like 7 or 8 or something at the time, and I was like, how did he do? He's like, he was in the 99th percentile. I was like, well, I don't think you can be in the 100th. So he was about as high as you can get in math, but I thought that was really cool, and That's a great point. Different coaches have different strengths, so try to utilize everybody's strengths. If kids are hearing something from the same voice and you're just thinking you always have the answers, you're probably wrong.
I agree with that.
Last thing,
what's the next
get in
point you want to
here.
hit on?
I put on here early on, and we tried to attack this, like I said, from getting the job. You want to base your outcomes. I put on here a note: base your outcomes on the success of your process, not your results. Because depending upon where you're taking over, those results are going to be wildly different. I think if you're basing everything on your success, win or loss wise, then you're missing the boat here. And I think it's important to don't always assume that success means you're doing it right. And certainly don't assume that failure on the field means you're doing it wrong. Because I've had teams that were very successful on the field that I thought there was tons of room for improvement. I've had other teams where I thought we really reached pretty close to our ceiling in terms of talent-wise. And I think that's what good coaches are after at every program and every team, individual team, is you're trying to figure out what the ceiling is for that team. And I think that's important for guys to understand and try to work towards that, because if you're doing it the right way in high school football, in my opinion, your ceiling's different year to year. Now, there's these powerhouse programs that have blue chippers every year and Division I recruits every year, and God bless them, they're doing a fantastic job and are great coaches. But I think in a lot of places, that definition of what that ceiling is going to be different. I know in a lot of, like, we're in small school environments, a lot of times you're kind of cultivating that one class that you're like, oh, this class is going to be really good, and you kind of shape everything around it and work to do that. And obviously you work to improve every single class, but it does seem to be in more rural areas that you're going to have big swings in talent. And I think you have to be able to adjust to those swings in talent. If your process is successful every year, and you're close to the ceiling every year of what that team can do, I think you're probably on the right track.
Amen to that. And much smarter men than us have spoken about that at length, especially Coach Saban. But I've just found the best coaches and the most successful coaches in the long run get their enjoyment, their fulfillment out of that process, and are not just so up and down with the results of each week. Because I don't know if you remember, I don't even remember this, but I think it was my junior year or maybe sophomore year, but early on when you were with us at PHS, 2012, 2013, I'd asked you before a game why you're so nervous and why you were like seeming sick. And you went, well, if your job depended on 16
embarrassing, but true.
Not anymore. But
I'm better
you're like,
now.
if your job depended on 16 or 17-year-olds, you'd probably be pretty nervous too. And I remember at the time thinking, like, you know what, that's such a great point, because your process can be true, but there's you never know with a kid who's 16, 17, because there's so much stuff going on in their life, and their brain is all over the place, and there's so many things happening. And, you can't control so many of those different aspects. But if you just rely on the results, it's going to be up and down and stressful and not a good ride. But if your process is true and you control what you can and you rely on that, revert to that, and you enjoy and soak up in that, and that's your motivating factor, I think you'll be more successful in the long run than not. And I mean, obviously that's worked out very well for you guys here, and other coaches have spoken about that numerous times. But that always stood out to me, made me laugh, because it's very true, and just spoke to the amount of uncontrollables you have, especially as a high school coach in a rural area. But if you can focus on what you can and make sure that's as best it can be, then all you can do is say, I did my best, and you got to be content with that.
Absolutely. And well, I think that's everything I had. And like I said, this is going to be one of the few episodes. There might be an episode here or there where we're just talking about a topic, but we're going to try to get a guest. We're really excited, and we're going to try to put these out weekly. And hopefully, if anybody can get anything out of it, that would be the goal of that. So thank you for getting on here with me, Coach, and talking ball for an hour. And when we start up here tomorrow, start second semester, we'll get the ball rolling and try to attack each day with some great enthusiasm. So I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope hopefully you got something out of it. You have something to add, or if you want to be on the show and talk about a various topic, we're going to do program building here for the next few episodes. please reach out to me at cody.collett, CODY.COLLETT at prescottschools.com, or you can reach out to Coach Brusso as well. We want to get guys on here, and first and foremost, we want to learn, and that's why I'm really excited next week to have Coach Kirsting on. Going to get to learn a lot from him as well in this process. So thank you so much, and Coach, you're the final word this evening.
I just appreciate it. It's been fun, and I'm excited to get going and just honestly talk to so many people with so much wisdom and experience, and just hopefully take as many nuggets away from that as I can, and put these out and just enjoy the journey of learning and hearing from those much wiser and smarter. So I'm excited to get going, and it should be fun.
Well, until next time, everybody, have a great week.